Lesson 100 is about place value and rounding numbers. This should be a review for you, so hopefully it'll come back to you fairly quickly. Now, when we're talking about place value, we're talking about what value we place on each individual digit in a number. And we always have a decimal point. Now, we may or may not write the decimal point. If it's a whole number, a lot of times we don't put a decimal point at the end. And if we go to the left of the decimal point, the first value, that's called the ones place. And then the next one is the tens. And then this one is the hundreds, and this one is the thousands. And see, each one is just another factor of 10. Ones, tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, hundreds, thousands, and so on. Now to the right of the decimal point, we start with the tenths, or 1 over 10, and then the hundredths, 1 over 100, then the thousandths, 1 over 1,000, then the 10,000ths, 1 over 10,000. Now you might be wondering, on the left you start with the ones place. Why don't you start with the once place on the right of the decimal point? Well, that would be the same as the ones, right? It'd be 1 over 1. So that would be the ones place. I mean, just take a number, 7, for example, and divide it by 10. That would equal 0.7, right? So that's the tenths place. That first decimal point to the right is the tenths, not the ones. Why are we even going over place value? Well, because it's important to know the names of the different place values when you're rounding numbers. Before we get to rounding numbers, let's just think about place value a little bit more. Just think of to the left of our decimal point there. We have 8,421. The 8 is in the thousands place, and so when we think of place value, we're really placing a value of 1,000 on the 8. So we're saying 8,000, and then the 4 is in the hundreds place, so we could say plus 400. It really has a value of 400. The 2, it really has a value of 20, and then the 1, it has a value of 1. And so if we added all that together, we would get that number, 8,421. So place value, that gives a value to each digit in a number. Now, if we wanted to round that number there, 6431, to the nearest hundred, what we do is we round that place value that we described. We want to round to the nearest hundred. We put an arrow over the digit to the right of that hundreds place, and if that digit that we put the arrow over is a 5 or greater, then we'll go ahead and round up the circled digit, round it up 1. If it's less than 5, then we leave that circled digit alone. And so we're rounding to that nearest hundreds place, and so our answer there, since the number with the arrow over it is a 3, it's less than 5, we would just say 6,400. Now look at these two numbers. Let's round to the nearest tens place. So that would be this place right here. And so we put an arrow over the next digit. That's a 5. And that's called a terminal digit because it is the last digit in that number. There's nothing following it. So something a lot of people do is if that circled digit is even and the next one is a 5, they just leave it alone. So we would just round this to 640. The next example, though, we have, if we round this to the nearest tens, that circled digit is a 3 and the terminal one is a 5 again. And what a lot of people do is if it's odd, that circled digit is odd, and then the next one or the terminal one is a 5, they round up. So we would say that's equal to 640 as well. Now, it doesn't really matter that much. But it is just kind of nice to have something to keep in your mind, some standard to keep in your mind when you're dealing with terminal 5s like that. And so that's what I usually do is if I have a terminal 5 and I'm rounding up, if that circled digit is odd, I leave it alone if that circled digit is even. Let's do some practice problems. In practice problem A, I want you to round that to the nearest thousandth. So that means to the right of the decimal point. The thousandth place, that would be the 1, because we think tenths, hundredths, thousandths. And so we want to round that. We circle that digit, put an arrow over the next one. That is not a terminal 5, and there are numbers greater than 0 after it, so that means we will round up. And so we'll have 35.032. And so that would be the rounded form of that, rounded to the nearest thousandth. The next example, I want you to round that to 3 decimal places. So what that means is round it to the nearest thousandth again. So you will put a circle around the 3rd decimal place and an arrow over the next digit. That is greater than a 5, so that tells us for sure that we will round up. And so we'll have 218.032 as our answer. Practice problem C, I want you to round that to the nearest 10,000. And so you circle the 5, because that would be in the 10,000s place, and put an arrow over the 4. That's less than 5, so we leave the 5 as it is, and we just round this to 65 or 650,000. And we don't really need our decimal point anymore. Let's do one more, 23.625. I want you to round that to 5 decimal places. Now remember what that bar means. That means a repeating decimal. So if we want to round that to 5 decimal places, let's just repeat that decimal again, 6, 2, 5. And now we'll have 6 decimal places, and we can round that. And so let's go ahead and circle that 6th decimal place. Or 5th, actually. I said I wanted you to round this to 5 decimal places. And we'll circle that. And the next number is a 5. But that doesn't have to be a terminal 5 because we're working with repeating decimals here. So let's just write 625 again. Put an arrow over that 5. And we see that after it we have values greater than 5. So we will round up here. And so let's say 23.62563 is what we would say if we rounded that to 5 decimal places. So on a repeating decimal like that, you may have to repeat the pattern several times in order to round correctly. Okay, well that's all for lesson 100.